Hey, History King here. Today we visit the old Hardwick Hall, located in Derbyshire. The hall was built between 1587 and 1596 by Bess of Hardwick, who was among the richest and best connected women of Elizabethan age. Bess died in 1608, leaving her son William Cavendish in charge of Hardwick, and he partially dismantled the old hall in the 1750s. Which became ruinous. The Hardwick estate was then transferred to the National Trust in 1959. Hardwick Old Hall is one of the most innovation houses of the Tudor period, a radical modern mansion which drew on the latest Italian innovations in house design, which is now a magnificent shell. Hardwick Old Hall has undergone a 7-month-long conservation project to protect the hall's 400-year-old plaster friezes, once the finest of their age and a display of Bess of Hardwick's status and wealth. The old hall's decorative plaster panels have long been exposed to the elements for 2 centuries. Now using a range of specialist skills, experts have managed to stabilise and preserve these original features, which depict beautiful plants and animals, as well as allegorical scenes. On the whole west wall, which faces out across the valley and is more exposed to weather damage, the team have completely reinstalled the render on the building. The old render was analysed so that the new mix matches what was there historically and has been traditionally applied. Bess was born into a family of respectable but impoverished Derbyshire landowners. They owned land in and around Hardwick and a modest manor on the site of Hardwick Old Hall. Bess left home at the age of 12 to serve at nearby Codnor Castle, and by the age of 15 she had married Robert Barlow, heir to a neighbouring gentry family. He was only 13 and died the following year. The teen-aged Bess moved on, probably to become a lady-in-waiting to Frances Grey, mother of Lady Jane Grey, which brought her into the top echelons of Tudor society. While serving there, she met and married the twice-widowed Sir William Cavendish. 20 years older than Bess, he had amassed a fortune under the Tudors, and in 1549 the couple were able, on Bess's advice, to buy the Chatsworth estate in Derbyshire. The marriage was happy and resulted in 8 children, but in 1557, Bess, still only 30, was widowed again. Faced with Cavendish's debt, she soon remarried. Her third husband was the elderly and rich William Sentlow, the captain of Elizabeth I's Guard. He died in 1565, leaving most of his estate to Bess. By now wealthy enough to live independently, Bess nonetheless chose to yet to marry again. Husband number 4 was George Talbot, 6th Earl of Shrewsbury, and one of the richest and most powerful men in the country. Bess, the Countess of Shrewsbury, cemented the union between the two families by arranging a marriage of 2 of her children by William Cavendish to 2 of Shrewsbury's offspring, including his heir. The marriage of the 4 children took place in February 1568, just before Bess and Shrewsbury themselves tied the knot. Bess also ensured that Chatsworth and some of her other estates would remain under her direct control. But the marriage soon ran into trouble. One source of strain was created when in 1568 Queen Elizabeth made Shrewsbury the custodian of Mary Queen of Scots. After her forced abdication, outly prestigious, the task proved both onerous and hideously expensive, and was to continue for 15 years. Mary was shuttled between Shrewsbury's many houses, a drain on his and Bess's resources and patience. Shrewsbury was also enraged when Bess damaged relations with the Queen by secretly engineering a marriage between her own daughter Elizabeth and Charles Stuart, whose heirs had claim to the English throne. He also resented the time and money Bess was devoting to remodelling Chatsworth on a palatial scale. One of the most powerful women in Elizabethan England, Bess of Hardwick rebuilt her father's home as a new powerhouse. Bess was born in the old manor house here in 1527. She left at the age of 12, and after an eventful life she came back to Hardwick in 1587. She was an aristocrat, a result of her marriage to the Earl of Shrewsbury, and was one of the wealthiest women of her time. She had always been interested in architecture, and rebuilt the old hall in grand style, suitable for her wealth and social position. This is the Great Hall, where the lower servants and servants of visitors took their meals. By the 1580s, aristocrat owners did not eat with their servants. Bess had a dining room upstairs, where she ate with her family and her ladies-in-waiting. The Great Hall was still the first reception room for all visitors, who would have been met by the Elizabethan equivalent of a butler, called the usher. His room was just to the left of the hall. The first thing the visitors saw in this room was the elaborate plasterwork overmantel over the fireplace, showing the heraldic symbols of Bess's family. The stag is the symbol for the Cavendish family, as Sir William Cavendish was her second husband and the father of her 8 children. The great stairs were an important part of the high-status route up from the Great Hall to the reception rooms at the top of the house. Guests would be shown the way by Bess's usher or butler. The great stairs was also used by the servants to carry Bess's food up from the kitchen via the Great Hall. The public display of the owner's food on its way to the table was part of the ritual of Elizabethan aristocratic life. If you look along the wall to the right, you can spot the remains of the stone doorway that led out from the hall. You are standing at the foot of the stairs, which wound their way up to the 3rd floor, to the most prestigious entertaining rooms. The scars in the wall show where the steps were inserted. We are standing below the Forest Great Chamber, one of the 2 best reception rooms in the house, high up on the 3rd floor. The Great Chamber could be used on exceptional occasions, for formal meals or musical entertainments. They were also where Bess would receive her guests, very formally surrounded by her ladies-in-waiting and her household officials, just like a smaller version of a royal court. The Great Chamber in the new hall still has the canopy of state over the chair where Bess would sit. This room is called the Forest Chamber because the decorative plasterwork depicts the woodland scene with people and animals. This is Bess's first version of the frieze that survives around the new hall Great Chamber, painted in naturalistic colours. She may have got the inspiration for this design from the famous room at her friend Sir Christopher Hatton's house, Holden Bay. His plaster frieze of trees was so realistic that birds flew in through the windows and built their nests in the branches. When Bess rebuilt her father's old house from 1587, she created a house that was rich in the latest designs, a real fashion statement. It was spacious and highly decorated, as well as being richly furnished, with tapestries, silks and velvet upholstery, and carved oak furniture. This was all done to demonstrate her social position as a countess and a very wealthy woman. The most prestigious rooms were all on the top floor. To the left, the forest great chamber was the grand entertaining room at the top of the great stairs. From here, Bess and her guests could walk through the best bedchamber suite, with its own drawing room furnished with the most expensive tapestries. They would pass the top of the secondary stairs and enter the hill great chamber, an equally spacious and elaborately decorated reception room. This room still commands long and wonderful views across the valley through its enormous windows. Below this level, the house was filled with bedchambers, a dining room, servants' room and a kitchen complex. Most importantly, the great hall welcomed every guest. This would have been the kitchen, with a massive fireplace for cooking. The heat from the fireplaces in the kitchen would have warmed the rooms overhead as well, which is perhaps why the nursery was above it. We can see the nursery plaster overmantel, which has a scene from the Bible. All the food in this kitchen was either cooked over an open wood fire or on top of a charcoal stove. There was running cold water here, however, coming into a system made of lead that stood between the windows. The food was handed out to the servants through the large hatch near the door. There are more rooms here designed for storing and preparing foodstuffs. Through the door on the right, a lobby has a door to the brew house, steps up to the larder for dry goods, and steps down to the cold larder. There are also a pastry room for baking with 2 bread ovens. There are mason marks on the fireplace arch, which you might see. This is the kitchen lobby. Steps in this area led up to the dry larder and down to the cold larder, where food was kept. The couple spent increasing amounts of time apart, and in 1584 the marriage broke down despite Elizabeth I's personal efforts to reconcile the wearing pair. Bess fled Chatsworth under threat of attack from her husband's men and retreated to Hardwick. In 1583, Bess had bought her old family home, there from the estate of her brother James, who had died heavily in debt. As Shrewsbury continued to dispute Bess's ownership of Chatsworth, Bess instead decided to focus her energies on a property that was undeniably hers. Her first building project at Hardwick was to enlarge and remodel the medieval manor into the house, now known as Hardwick Old Hall. Between 1585 and 1590, the house was transformed out of all recognition on a grand and lavish scale, embracing the latest architectural fashions. Designed piecemeal as the works went along, the hall provided a comfortable home for Bess, her favourite son William, and his family. This was the pastry room with bread ovens for baking. Then on the 18th of November 1590, when the old hall was still incomplete, Shrewsbury died, leaving Bess with an even larger income than she had already. A widow for the fourth and last time, Bess was now in her early 60s, staggeringly rich, and with 2 large building projects already behind her. She had an insatiable enthusiasm for building. Now she had the means to start a new project, and this time one that she could begin from scratch, not compromised by the need to extend an existing house. The temptation proved irresistible. Almost immediately, Bess began planning an even grander house at Hardwick, just yards away from the unfinished old hall. Bess's last years were spent in building and furnishing Hardwick and another house nearby in Old Coats, intended for her son William and his family, though no trace of it survived today. She died in 1608, aged over 80, leaving William most of her great estates, including the 2 Hardwicks. Having risen through the Elizabethan Society to become the second most important woman in England after the Queen, Bess of Hardwick used the fortune she had amassed to indulge the passion for building that defined her life and ensured her legacy. Her houses display her taste, wealth and business acumen. Nowhere are her achievements more clearly proclaimed than at Hardwick, where all of the house's towers are topped by her initials and Countess coronet. This was probably the room Bess's favourite son, Sir William Cavendish, used before he and his wife moved out of the Old Hall to their house nearby. The room was originally fitted out with oak panelling right up to the ceiling, which had good insulating properties. It would also have benefited from the heat from the bread ovens in the pastry beneath it. The plaster over mantel has a scene copied from a Flemish engraving. It shows a biblical figure, a man called Naphtali, sitting astride a stag. Naphtali was the founder of one of the tribes of Israel. The scenes referred to a description of his character, like a female deer, gentle and merciful. It is also a visual reminder of Bess's heraldic symbol, the Cavendish stag. William Cavendish is in charge of Hardwick. He was the founder of the Cavendish family, Duke of Devonshire, who are still based at the Chatsworth estate that Bess and her father had bought. The Dukes eventually came to prefer Chatsworth over Hardwick and partially dismantled the Old Hall in the 1750s, which gradually became ruinous. Its open interior was planted with specimen trees in 1793. The Hardwick estate was eventually transferred to the National Trust in 1959, and the Ministry of Works took on the guardianship of the Old Hall, carrying out major programme of stabilisation works. The smoke-blackened stonework was cleaned in the 1980s, and in the 1990s, the timber viewing platform was built in the Hill Great Chamber, making it possible to see the extraordinary plasterwork at close hand. This doorway opened into an important suite of rooms, furnished with the best quality tapestries, upholsteries and furniture in the house. The inventory written in 1601 for Bess describes the Bess lodging here. This comprised a luxurious bedchamber with a small room leading off it, and a withdrawing room. It was not for Bess herself. However, as her bedchamber is listed on the floor below, it was the state suite intended for the highest status guest, and to be seen by all Bess's visitors as they walked from one great chamber to the other, impressed by her taste and purchasing power. The sumptuous bed was hung with red and yellow silk damask curtains, trimmed with gold and red lace. The bedspread was made of gold and red striped satin. The great chair was upholstered in crimson velvet, with embroidered motifs in gold. 2 Turkish carpets, too rare to be walked on, decorated a table and cupboard. Hill Great Chamber. This great room was the highlight of the Elizabethan visitors' experience of Bess's hospitality. By day, light flooded in from the huge windows. The windows behind faces the north, towards Bolsover Castle, owned by her son, Sir Charles Cavendish. The fireplace wall window faces west, the direction of Chatsworth, the home Bess created with her husband, Sir William Cavendish. The south window looks towards South Wingfield Manor, a property of her late husband, the Earl of Shrewsbury, and a temporary home for Bess while she built the Old Hall. Bess used the design of the central panel to make a point about her long life and steady rise to the top. The winged figure is copied from an engraving that shows the triumph of patience over fortune, Lady Luck. Thanks all for watching, do take care and have a fantastic week ahead.